Hello Internet, it is Devastator. Wanted to bring you another PTS video because one of the more controversial weapons in the game recently got updated yet again, the Gatekeeper. Pretty much no introduction needed. You all remember what it was about. It was pretty fucking OP. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna contest that point. I understand that the Gatekeeper was very overly effective at what it was supposed to do, and it should not have had the range that it had previously. Turn that dialogue volume down. So, why am I making this video? Well, the Gatekeeper got changed so that it no longer accelerates at 50 meters a second squared, it accelerates at 100 meters a second squared. Currently accelerates from 150 meters a second to 450 meters a second, and at 100 meters a second squared, it accelerates to its maximum velocity in 3 seconds. I've used this weapon. I'm not shooting it around, but I used it before the video, made the video. It still doesn't feel like something long range-ish. Is it better? Yeah, it's better. It's I just don't really have any words. It's the same as it was pretty much on live. The same issues are crippling it. You can't predict range very well against moving targets. You can't predict range very well while you yourself are moving. This is especially true in harasser combat, and I see a lot of issues developing between the two platforms, harassers and MBTs, with this weapon in mind. So, can you continue to spam it from range? Yes, only if the target is truly standing still. Any amount of movement and you're likely to miss much more because tracking with acceleration, drop, and lead with the weapon is now very difficult. The current amount of drop is something similar, I'd say, to what the Enforcer is on live right now. But for what it is right now on PTS, I really think this is the wrong way to balance the weapon. Acceleration is a poor mechanic in my opinion. It's, something you gotta live with on a lot of weapons, but the amount of acceleration that the Gatekeeper has to go through to reach maximum velocity is just really high, and you can't really lead with it. You can't predict where the rocket's gonna go, because you have to consider how long the rocket is gonna be in flight for that to happen. In tank-on-tank combat, I could see this coming back in a loose sense for consistent damage and rockets and suppression of enemy tanks, but I don't see it getting the same consistent hits that it used to, and I don't see its engagement range being very good to warrant using over the halberd. It's just, I find it ironic that the way that they are balancing a long-range weapon is to reduce your hit chance at range. That to me is just kind of ironic a little bit. But all in all, two of the things I want to address, what I've seen on Reddit recently that I can't really agree with, and I think are things that should be addressed. People have said that, well, the nerf to the Gatekeeper is good because it now brings it in line with other long-range AV options. To which I would say that's good and bad. This is going to go into another point of consider the platform that I'll tell you about here in a second. Consider the platform as sitting on Harasser, Prowler, Vanguard, and Magrider. And when you do consider the platform, that dialogue is annoying, Jesus. Okay, that didn't get rid of it, weird. When you consider the platform that it's sitting on, the Prowler. The Prowler has the highest DPS cannon in the game, by a small margin. It's noticeable in combat. It's the greatest source of damage from the Prowler. And when you lock down, it obviously gets higher. Obviously, lockdown is going to increase your DPS much higher. But the Gatekeeper is not going to give you the same amount of DPS in any situation that the cannon would. So comparing this to the other two platforms, which have higher DPS cannons, have lower DPS cannons, I'm sorry, but higher DPS secondaries, the discrepancy in DPS between the cannons is, not enough to warrant other advantages on the Prowler's secondary. One of the things that made the Gatekeeper good was its range. You could reach out and touch the target from very far away. Obviously too far, but it was what kind of kept the Gatekeeper a little bit competitive against the other two. The other two have significantly more DPS, and saying that they should compete within the same ranges as the Gatekeeper is not a very good idea. This is especially true on Harasser combat. A Gatekeeper Harasser previously versus an Enforcer and Saron Harasser was able to keep them away, but it wasn't able to kill them faster. The Enforcer and the Saron would obviously, if able to close the distance, would inevitably kill the Gatekeeper Harasser much faster than it could. With the acceleration mechanics, this makes it even worse for the Gatekeeper, because the Gatekeeper no longer has that range advantage, and now the other two are capable of closing the gap much more quickly, because target acquisition and target tracking is much harder with this amount of acceleration range. And when you consider the platforms of harassers, it doesn't look very... prospects look bleak for the Gatekeeper ever making a return. Honestly, I think the Halberd at this point for TR might become meta again. And then you have Prowlers versus Vanguards versus Mag Riders, and I think the range advantage has been neutered so much that it's going to rely on the main cannon again and locking down, and the Gatekeeper is just kind of going to fall into this area where it's like it's a weird middle ground where you don't want to consider pulling it. The Enforcer and the Saron have their strengths. The Enforcer is a very strong mid-range option and reloads like a shotgun, reloads one at a time. It's very good, consistent DPS if you can control the trigger. The Saron is capable of plinking at range and then mag dumping up close. It's a very flexible weapon. The Gatekeeper doesn't really have a seeming advantage anymore. People will say, oh, it's still got range. It's only really got range against someone who's standing still, target. And even then, you can probably dodge it just by 80-80ing and left-right. So, the Gatekeeper is pretty much... You took a bland and overly effective weapon and then basically made it a bland and ineffective weapon. So I'm not really thrilled about that, and I'm still not thrilled about that. So the point of the video, to the point that I've been trying to make for a while and kind of been stumbling over, is what is a better way to balance this? It sure as shit is not acceleration that this is at this high. I don't think acceleration of 300 meters a second is conducive to a very good long-range weapon. You've got basically a weak-ass mid-range weapon right now, and it's not even very good at that. I'd much rather have a Vulcan on the Prowler, which has a tighter cone of fire than the Harasser version, than this piece of shit right now. So what are other methods? I think cone of fire, honestly, would be one way to do it. The other way to do it would just be make it accelerate from a higher starting point. Like 300, 250, 300, something like that, so that it actually has a chance of making it to 450 meters a second. But on the cone of fire one, if the cone of fire was started from pinpoint accuracy and bloomed up to something that was maybe the current Mjolnir's maximum cone of fire, and then reset, that would be another way of doing it. Having a set cone of fire would obviously destroy the weapon. Set cone of fires are not enjoyable in any sense. Cone of fire isn't a very good mechanic, but if you could control the cone of fire after having it from pinpoint, you would create it so that you would have lots and lots of range, but you would not have the ability to spam. It would basically be like a reverse Saron in a sense. If that makes any sense, you guys think about that. It would bloom very slowly up to its max cone of fire, which would basically make it so that you couldn't hit at range. And then if you wanted to, you could reset the cone of fire to get that accuracy again, but you wouldn't have the maximum DPS. Anyway, this was more of an opinion piece. I probably should have put that at the beginning. Forgot to. And this is kind of a rant, but to the developers, I think you're balancing this weapon wrong. This, even in its current state on PTS, this is not something that I would consider putting on my Prowler again. It's too inconsistent. It's too unpredictable. It's not something that I would ever put on a Harasser again. That is for certain. Especially when you're going high speeds. Against anything that's fast moving or even relatively quickly moving, the Gatekeeper is now absolute trash. So, to the developers, I say this, just please consider alternatives. This is not a very good design iteration for this weapon. You've essentially balanced this weapon, which requires consistent hits, by taking away its ability to track targets at range and get those consistent hits. So, please figure out something else if it's within the deck of cards that you can do that. And if you are set on acceleration, please consider increasing the starting acceleration to 250 minimum, or 300 I'd say. Anyway, this is Dev, and I am signing off of test server.